The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Well, it's Monday, and it's time for the airing of the grievances. Oh, we should have gotten in. We had a better record. The analytics screwed us. It's all part of the dance. It's all part of the March dance. And some teams, yeah, they could make a case that they should have been in. But each conference now has a conference tournament. And the most assured way that you could get in is if you win the conference tournament, which not that long ago, well, I guess for some a long time ago, not for me anyway, but that was the only way you were getting in, is if you won the conference tournament. So here we are with 68 teams. We got a lot of whining about going to maybe 96 teams. Who knows? I think it's good where it is. I think it was better at 64, but I can live with 68. But I think of where it was, you know, we talked about this because we've had all these anniversaries, but where it was in 1974 when you only had 25 teams and Maryland lost that classic game to NC State, and because NC State was the only team that could go from the ACC by winning the conference, they went, and Maryland, which had a chance to get to a Final Four and maybe even win a national championship, they went home, and they passed up the NIT because they'd won that 2 years earlier and didn't think they had to do that. And that led to the expansion of the tournament. They went to 32 the following year, and then by the 80s, it was at 48. And then at 64, which it was, I believe, for the first time when Georgetown played that classic game against Villanova in the final in 1985. That was the first year that they had gone to 64. They did not have a shot clock, and they did not have a three-point line. And had they had either one of those, perhaps Georgetown would have won, certainly with the shot clock, as Villanova was able to bleed it out and take the perfect shot. They pretty much played a perfect game, shot 78% in the second half, and pulled off one of the all-time upsets. But as you look back on this, and I think of 1982 when Len DeLuca came up with this brilliant idea. Len DeLuca was a producer with CBS, and it was his idea to have this selection show. And I think of what has gone on with the evolution of that, and maybe it gives me hope that they will stay at 68, maybe even pie in the sky, they go back to 64. But the first time they rolled it out, there were 48 in 1982, and it was DeLuca's brilliant idea to show it to the public as it was being unveiled, that's what people wanted to see. He realized what the office pools were beginning to mean, and people wanted to see where their teams were going to go, what region they were in, whether they got in or whether they didn't get in, and the great drama of having the cameras at the either, well, they used to do it in the living rooms of the coaches. Now they do it at the school, but having the cameras there when the reveal comes out and the schools are on the bubble who either get in or don't get in, the great joy, the great disappointment, the whole deal. And it's worked out great. So over the years, greed took over, as it does with most things. And one year, I think it was 2016, they tried to expand the selection show to 2 hours, milk it for everything they could. And somebody leaked out the brackets on Twitter really early on. See, they were gonna stretch this out and make you sit through an hour, maybe an hour and a half before you finally found out what the brackets were. And somebody leaked it out on Twitter, and that blew the whole thing up. Well, I noticed last night, and it was great, they went back to the old 1 hour format. They didn't Potsky around. They gave their tributes to Greg Gumbel, and I hope everything's all right with him. I worked with him many years ago, a really fine guy. They said that he's dealing with a family health issue. I assume that's somebody else in the family. I'm not sure. But hope all that he's dealing with turns out well, and he's back next year. Adam Zucker did a fine job, and everything that they needed to do was done. They revealed the brackets. They had their analysis. All three of the analysts, which was, I guess, Seth Davis and who else was on with him? The three analysts. Clark Kellogg was one of them, and I think there was one more. All three of them picked Connecticut to win the national championship, and their Final Four was all the same, including Arizona as a 2 seed going from the West Regional, not North Carolina, but chalk the rest of the way. They liked Houston to get to the Final Four. They liked Purdue, although I got my doubts about Purdue after they've lost the last 2 years to St. Peter's and Fairleigh Dickinson. Maybe they finally get there this year. And UConn was the pick of everybody to win the national championship, win a second straight national title. And I thought, well, okay, they've got this back down to an hour. So, they realized that the greed got the best of them trying to get this into a 2-hour show and making it 1 hour. It works much better. And it is one of the greatest hours of television of the year. The drama of that is great. And watching the kids' faces when they find out they're getting in and where they're going and, the disappointment of those that didn't make it. I mean, it's just really good television. It just works well. And hats off to Len DeLuca, who made this happen 42 years ago for the first time. Now, the unhappy teams, the airing of the grievances. Kim English, who was at George Mason last year, and when Ed Cooley took the job at Georgetown, English went from Mason to Providence to replace him. And they had a good year. They were 21-13, and they were one of those so-called bubble teams as the selections were made. Now, they were hurt by a number of things that happened this year. Most notably, there were 5 teams that would have not have gotten in, but got in by winning conference tournaments. So that really hurt some of the bubble teams, and that's why you only had 3 going from the Big East with Marquette, Creighton, and UConn as the number 1 overall seed. And English, his job is to get his team there. Ed Cooley has done that. Cooley had built a really good program. It wasn't like he was taking over a program like Cooley took over at Georgetown, which had gone in the dumper. This was a pretty good program, and the expectation is that he gets them back to the tournament. Didn't happen, and despite his 21-13 record, they may have looked at the analytics, and when he looked at them looking at the analytics, this is what he said to reporters about that.
Yeah, I think the analytics are right. I think you could schedule bad teams in your non-league and beat the snot out of them and beat them by 50 and 60. And I think coaching for so long has been a gentleman agreement. I mean, you have a large lead at the end of the game. For health reasons, you take guys out to get some other guys opportunities to play. You take guys out. But right now, it might be a change in college basketball where beating teams by 40, scheduling to beat teams by 40 and 50 might be a thing to do. But when you get into this league, the analytics aren't going to look very good in league. Because you're playing against some really, really good coaches. We play at Connecticut, and I think they shoot 40% from the field. We're a good defense. They won the game. They should be credited for winning the game. So I do think there are some flaws in the system. But that's not important. It's up to us to do what's best for our program in retention and scheduling and recruiting to give ourselves a chance next March.
Part of his problem, again, was the 5 teams that made it by upsets in conference tournaments. And the other is that the league wasn't considered to be that good, with only 3 teams from the Big East making it. John Thompson was famous for having a cupcake of a non-conference schedule when he coached in the Big East because he knew that this was a tough road to go every year. The teams he was playing, they were in the rankings as well with, St. John's and Connecticut and Syracuse and all the teams that he had to play every year. So he was famous for scheduling schools like St. Leo early in their season. And they'd say, well, why do you schedule such an easy school? Well, I got to get my record up a little bit. And when you get into the conference, it's a lot different. In recent years, they have encouraged teams to play a tougher out-of-conference schedule. The problem I think that English ran into this year was the conference wasn't as good as expected. And even with 21 wins, they're left out, so they go on to the NIT, and they're going to play Boston College. By the way, several schools, including Indiana, opted out of the NIT. They were selected, didn't want to go. St. John's didn't either. And in the case of Indiana, they said we got to concentrate on the transfer portal right now, which, if the NCAA does go to 96 teams, that's the end of the NIT anyway. That'll crush them. But the other part of it is that the new world of college basketball, you got to circle the wagons right away, and you got to keep your players. This will happen. I don't know if it will happen this year, but it's going to happen, just like it's happening in college football, where you've got players opting out, not playing in the bowl game because they don't want to get hurt their draft chances, things like that, or they know they're going to transfer anyway. And I think that's probably going to become more common in college basketball. So it's not like the field is terrible this year in the NIT, but some of the schools that they wanted just said, no, we're not going to do that. We got other things that we have to worry about. So, excuse me. So as they move forward, the NIT, which used to be a very, very prestigious tournament and way, way back was more prestigious than the NCAA tournament. And in fact, in 1970, when Al McGuire was coaching at Marquette, and they only had 25 teams in the NCAA tournament, he didn't like where he was seated or the region he was playing in or who his matchup was. I forget what it was. But Al McGuire said to the NCAA, we're not going. We're going to the NIT. I mean, that's unthinkable now. But in those days, nobody really made a big deal about it because that's how good the NIT was. And when Maryland won it in 72 with only 25 teams in the NCAA tournament, that was considered to be impressive. Lefty Driesell went around telling people they were the number 2 team in the country because they were, besides UCLA, they were the only other team that didn't end the season with a loss. So there's that. But the NIT, which now plays its Final Four in Vegas instead of Madison Square Garden in New York, has lost a lot of luster. As for Danny Hurley and his defending champion team, he was given the opportunity last night on ESPN with their crew, with Jay Billis and Seth Greenberg and Jay Williams, to kvetch a little bit. They are a number 1 seed, but as you look at their draw, which starts on what is it, Friday? They start Friday or they start Saturday or Thursday? No, they're Friday afternoon, 2:45. As they get started, he was asked about the draw, which has them opening against Stetson, and then they would play the winner of Northwestern and Florida Atlantic, which could lead them down to a Sweet 16 matchup with possibly Auburn, which has been a very, very good team throughout the tournament. They won their conference to the SEC yesterday. So, he was asked the pretty tough road to go, given the opportunity to kvetch, and he decided he wasn't going to do that.
It's tough no matter where you are. I mean, it's, there's so much depth in college basketball, these days, I think, more so than playing, all of the excellent teams. I mean, San Diego State, Florida Atlantic, 2 teams that were in the Final Four with us last year that have returned a lot to their programs. Auburn, who ran through the SEC tournament, and then Iowa State, who's playing as good as anybody in the country. This time of year comes down to, who plays the best of their identity, and then, obviously are the matchups favorable.
Dan, what did you learn about your team since that Creighton game in terms of how they've responded since that point?
Yeah, just the characters there, and then the ability to learn from failure, to really, understand what our true identity, needs to be. We become vulnerable just like everybody else, when we get away from our formula. We're one of the best offensive teams in the country. I think we've risen to number 1 in terms of efficiency there. We play elite defense, especially with Klingon in there. Maybe we're one of the top defensive teams in the country. We rebound the heck out of the ball. We show up with a relentlessness in terms of how hard we play, like we've never won anything. So, when we stick to those principles, and we got away from them when we went to Creighton, but we learned from it, and we got right back on our game.
Danny, you mentioned elite defense, and I think I was at your practice, one of your practices in Seattle before you played Gonzaga, and you had your team together, and you talked about the fact that you were an elite offensive team, but your defense wasn't yet elite. What has changed since Seattle and now that you call yourself an elite defensive team?
Yeah, I think that the two guys got healthy and then got on the court with this team. Steph Castle, who at 6'6", it's got the physical strength, the athleticism, to potentially shut down the other team's best perimeter guy. So we've got a perimeter stopper, and then we have a 7'2" center that protects the rim. It has a defensive impact unlike any other player in the country in terms of what he does there. So some of it was our two best defenders weren't healthy and together on the court, and I think obviously the defensive end, there's a lot of principles you got to understand and know what spots to be in.
A lot of people on TV or fans talk about how does UConn become back-to-back champions, and they kind of use that terminology. What terminology do you use to describe this particular race for this year's team, which is, we know here, is very different than last year's team?
Yeah, I think for us, Jay, we just were so locked in. We've got such a great group of just like-minded, super competitive, players and coaches that are just all about like winning and preparing at an elite level. We've got just a great group of players that value winning above all things, and we understand that we had the best season up to this point in college basketball. We had a pretty clean sheet in terms of non-conference regular season, and then we performed at a high level at MSG. We can't use that for any advantage starting on Friday with Stetson. We're going to show up in that arena in Brooklyn like a completely desperate team, but with the confidence of champions.
That's Danny Hurley. Comes from an amazing basketball family. His father, Bob Hurley, coached at St. Anthony's forever, a poor school in Jersey City where he raised his family, and he worked as a police detective. It was his day job. I don't even think he drew a salary to coach at St. Anthony's, and he had offers to go to big-time schools to coach, and he said, no, this is where I should be. Coached both of his sons. Bobby Hurley became one of the all-time great college guards playing at Duke, played on a couple of national championship teams there, and then went to the pros. Sadly, got in a car accident which shortened his career. On the other hand, Danny, who was expected to be next in line of the great point guards of the Hurley family, went to Seton Hall, didn't have the college career that he had hoped for, wasn't anywhere near what Bobby had, but both of them gone into coaching. Bobby's done well. I think he's still at Arizona State, and Danny has done amazingly well, winning a national championship last year at Connecticut, and is the favorite to do it again. One team from the D.C. area is going to the NCAA Tournament, and they start tomorrow. That's Howard. We'll look at their situation as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Well, we got Tony coming up on Monday. This is a big week for that show. This is the Brackets week where they have all their friends on, and they pick the games, and they track the progress of how they do throughout the tournament. Phil's mom, I imagine, will make an appearance at some point, and all the people who are with them on a regular basis also pick brackets. So that'll pretty much dominate the rest of the month on that show. So I always enjoy that, and listening to people pick the games. That's what they do every year on the Tony Kornheiser Show. I just am looking at what's happening locally and thinking of the years when there would sometimes be four. I'm not sure if we ever had 5 teams go, but when Jim Larinaga was at George Mason, they were there on a pretty regular basis and made history in 2006 when they became the first mid-major to get to a Final Four. That was just an unbelievable run. Mike Jarvis took over at George Washington 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. And he got them to the Sweet 16, I think, twice. And then there have been a couple of other coaches who have followed and have had some success. When Gary Williams got Maryland back on track after the Bob Wade disaster, they were in all the time. I think they had an 8-year run where they made it every single year, and, of course, had the incredible 2-year run of 2001 and 2002 when they went to the Final Four, lost to Duke, and then came back and won the school's national championship in 2002. Georgetown, ever since John Thompson got there, and even in the early days of John Thompson III, they were good. I think in his 3rd year, they got to the Final Four. He did a good job and was getting them in. The problem was he went in as a top seed, not a top seed, 1 seed, but they were 4, and they were constantly getting knocked off. And then the program kind of bottomed out, and Patrick Ewing got them there once with that miracle run through the Big East tournament where they won the 5 games in 5 days. But by and large, local basketball has really taken a hit in recent years. Last year, that's not to shortchange what Kevin Willard did last year, getting Maryland to the tournament and winning a game and then going out against Alabama, which was a top seed. No shame in that. But this year, it's pretty barren. And Howard is going back-to-back. They made it last year. This is only their 4th time ever in the NCAA tournament. They have yet to win a tournament game. And when the brackets came out last night, my initial thought was, oh, that's a shame. They have to play in the play-in game against Wagner, which is tomorrow night's first game of the tournament in Dayton. And if they go out there, that really sucks. That's almost like not going to the NCAA tournament. On the other hand, if they win, and this might be an opportunity for them because they're always going to be, almost always. Maybe they have just such an amazing season they get in as a 15 or maybe a 14. But most likely they're going to go as a 16 seed, which they are this year. They were just 2 games over 500 for the season, but they won the MEAC tournament. Great game over Delaware State. They won that game. And so they have to go now play in the playing game. But the upside of that is if they win, they get to play North Carolina. Now, they're probably not going to beat North Carolina. It'll probably be a similar result to what they had against Kansas last year. But that's getting there, and that's going to 2 different stops. For a school like Howard, that's a great, great opportunity to be a part of the NCAA tournament. And all credit to Kenny Blakeney. When Kenny Blakeney took over, that program was a mess. They had a couple of years where they won like 3 or 4 games. And he came in from Duke, where he had been an assistant, local guy, went to DeMatha, played at DeMatha, played at Duke. And he has really built something there. When you have sustained success like that, that's important. Sometimes you have like one really great year and you can't keep it going. But he's managed to do that, and he's managed to do it with a variety of players. One of them is one of the most intriguing players in the tournament, and that's Seth Towns, who's 6'9", 230 pounds. He's 26 years old. We have had older players in this tournament before. Sometimes, though, they're war veterans. George Mason in 2000, before they went to the Final Four, I forget the guy's name, but it might have been George Evans was his name. He was 26 years old, but he had been in the service. He'd been in the military. And Jim Larinaga brought him in for his leadership, which he provided. And they had a really close game. They had a chance to beat Maryland that year. The year Maryland first went to the Final Four in 2001, they had an opportunity to do that. And so we've seen that before, but this is really an unusual thing that has a lot to do with COVID. It has a lot to do with the way the NCAA runs things now. And so here's a guy who's in his 8th year since leaving high school. This guy Seth Towns, he went to Harvard and was a good player there, got hurt, and they don't do red shirts. So he graduated. His knee got in good enough shape that he got another opportunity, and he's been playing at Howard, played last year. This is his, of course, has to be his final year of eligibility, but it's just a wonderful story of a guy who's persevered and provides great leadership to this Howard team. One of his teammates is Bryce Harris. He's a junior, so he's a real kid compared to Towns, but he talked to Chick Hernandez of Channel 9 last night after Howard found out that it was heading to Dayton tomorrow to play against Wagner.
82 games lost to injuries, what Coach told me today. Down the stretch, you had 5 guys and a walk-on, right, finishing up games. What does that say about the squad?
This is resiliency. Honestly, we work so hard, not only just in practice, but outside of that, school and getting extra work in. And a lot of guys understand what it's like and what's the requirement for winning, and certain type of sacrifices that's needed in order to achieve that. And the crazy part is even with those sacrifices, some still don't achieve it. Mm-hmm. So just having that blind faith, Coach says all the time, lead by faith, not by sight. So we take that philosophy very seriously.
I even heard you guys cheering when another HBCU team went up on the board there. There's obviously a pride there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Honestly, we love to see all type of HBCUs get the exposure that we need. I feel like it's because we're HBCUs, they don't get the natural, exposure from most mid-majors as you would. I feel like HBCUs have a ton of talent, and, making sure that spotlight is on there and making sure that, whoever who made those same sacrifices and won the same way that we did are able to, reap from their benefits. You know what I'm saying?
You grow up in this game. You watch this tournament every year. That theme song, "One Shining Moment," has to run through all your guys' minds. What do you, as a kid and then as a young adult, what do you dream about? What's the moment for you?
Winning. That's the moment. Getting to the stage isn't just, one thing you think about. You think about winning the game. You think about celebrating with your teammates. That's the type of stuff that you really look for, and being able to go home and tell the people around you and all the people who are younger want to be in your position that you are a winner. And I feel like that's the dream right there. There's nothing else really surpasses that.
You got Wagner right out of the gate. Do you know anything about them?
I actually used to play AAU with one of their ball players. So it should be interesting seeing him. It's crazy how certain stages, in certain different times in life periods, people come back and cross paths again. So I mean, him we playing each other, being on the same AAU team at one point, for another example, I don't know if you guys know Sakai Ziegler in Tennessee. Me and him used to play in middle school together.
Oh, wow.
And he's going to be playing his biological brother at St. Peter's. So I was looking at some stuff like that. Basketball, it's a big world, but it's a small world at the same time. So there's countless matchups in there like that, So it's exciting. It's exciting to say the very least.
Last question is the guy that's sitting behind you. You talked about it before, Seth. I mean, the journey that he's been on. He's older than a lot of NBA players right now. 8 years to get to this point. What has he meant to your squad?
He's huge. Honestly, like I said, the word resiliency, he just hadn't given up on himself. That's just the biggest thing for me. The type of self-confidence and courage that he has, to come back and, have a huge impact. You know what I'm saying? And I love that from him. And to be honest with you, having him on my team is huge because I'm just a sponge. I just want to, be able to get all the information I can from him. You know what I'm saying? He's very wise, beyond his years, especially, having that Harvard degree and things of that nature. So, talking to him is just a great experience. I don't think he really understands how much people look up to him for real.
So he's been at 2 HUs.
Definitely, he has been at 2 HUs, yes, but he's at the real HU now.
Yeah, very clever. Howard University and that little school up in Massachusetts called Harvard. And Seth Towns brings all kinds of experience to this team from Howard, which is going to the tournament for the second straight year. That was Bryce Harris, who's a junior forward with Chick Hernandez of Channel 9, who was out at the celebration last night when Howard found out where it was going to go. And again, I look at this and say, well, some might say it's a snub that you have to go play in Dayton. On the other hand, it's an opportunity to win. And if you win that game, then you're in the spotlight. Then you're playing a number one seed. And number one seeds get a little bit more exposure in the tournament. Now, as things work now, it used to be that we were at the mercy of CBS, which game they were going to send you to. This is the time of year where you find out where True TV is on your dial. You probably, the rest of the year, you have no idea where True TV is. But tomorrow night and Wednesday night, you're going to have the 2 games each night, and then it will serve as an extra channel as we get through the first weekend of the tournament. Oh, yeah, that's what they do. People beating each other up in parking lots, parking wars, whatever it is that they do on there. I do not go there except during the NCAA tournament, but I'm glad we have this. Do you remember the days when by the way, you remember that where we used to be sitting there and go, why are we being subjected to this game? What is CBS doing? Why don't we see the score up in the corner there? Why don't they take us to that game? Well, now you have the choice. It's taken out one of the big fetches of the tournament. Like who's controlling this? Who's deciding which game we watch? I remember too when Maryland played Georgetown. This would have been 2001, the Sweet 16 game. We didn't have that. So I think it was like half of the first half that we didn't get to see because the game before it was close and they wanted to stay with it. And those of us in this area want to watch Georgetown and Maryland play. It doesn't happen very often. It doesn't happen in the regular season because John Thompson made sure of that for a long, long time. And now we have all these opportunities to watch every minute of every single game. Well, they're played simultaneously, but the point being is that you can switch and go wherever you go. This is the first year that I have really looked at the women's bracket, to be honest with you. Maryland usually has a better year than this, and they host one of these regionals. They get to play in College Park the first weekend. Hasn't been that kind of year. They were kind of a bubble team. They made it in as a 10th seed and will go to Stanford to play on Friday against Iowa State. If they win that game, they would likely match up with Stanford on Sunday. Stanford's playing Norfolk State, and they're a 2 seed and may have a chance to win the tournament. But this will be a year where I'm going to be watching where Caitlin Clark plays. She's got the same situation that Maryland had when they were one of the top teams. They got a number 1 seed. They're playing in Iowa City on their home court. So if they get past, and they've got play-in games there as well. So Holy Cross is going to play UT Martin on Thursday. The winner of that will play Iowa on Saturday. So we don't get to see Caitlin Clark until after the first 2 days of the tournament. If they win that, which they should, then they would play the winner of West Virginia and Princeton to get to the Sweet 16, which could possibly mean a matchup with Kansas State, Colorado. Maybe if there's an upset 12-5 in the women, we get this interstate matchup between Drake and Iowa. Could be fun. But this is the first year that I can honestly say I'll be paying a little bit of attention to the women's bracket, because the women's game this year overall has been better. And, the great matchups that we may have down the road with South Carolina staying undefeated, LSU, which won the national championship last year. These are things to pay attention to. Connecticut is always going to be in the mix because they're Connecticut, but they've had a lot of injuries this year. They have a number of players, 5 of them suffering season-ending injuries, and they're not the same as they used to be. But Paige Beckers is one of the best players in women's basketball, and we'll pay attention. This has been a big year, and it's been led by Caitlin Clark, where women's basketball has stepped forward. Coming up, Bobby Wagner had a news conference on Friday, one of the signings by the Commanders, as they have now added 16 new players. I mean, that tells you what Adam Peters felt about the roster when he took over. Remember the opening news conference when he was asked if he had assessed the roster, and he paused for seemingly like 10 minutes. It was maybe 10 seconds, but it told you a lot. And so a lot of new faces, and we'll see a lot of not even familiar faces, because guys don't stay very long anymore anyway. But he has really turned things over, and we'll see if Bobby Wagner can become maybe the London Fletcher of this era for the Commanders. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Tony's coming up at 11 o'clock today. My voice holding out, we hope, for another 40 minutes. Had a little strain on it yesterday as I was doing a girls hockey tournament. I don't know anything about hockey, but I was announcing the winners and the losers in the championship games and the ponytail tournament in Laurel. All congratulations to them for keeping it running for 20 years. Not a lot of attention on the Nats, and just watched little bits here and there of the games that have been on Masson. But the prospects, starting to hear some really good things. James Wood, local, grew up in Rockville, big 6'6" guy, hits a bunch of home runs. Dylan Cruz, the number 2 pick of the draft last year out of LSU. Robert Hassel III, Brady House, and Trey Lipscomb. So there's some real hope from these guys. It's a lot different spring training to regular season games. We'll see what develops. And also, you want to see what you're going to have this year in Josiah Gray. He's 26 years old. They're hoping getting to the point where he's hitting his stride. He was their all-star representative this year, and he didn't allow any hits or walks, and did have a strikeout in the 1 inning he pitched in the all-star game. Started 30 games last year, had a decent ERA, 3.91, which was the best among the starters. So if he can take the step up and be the ace of the staff, I don't think you've got a team that's going to be in any kind of contention, but if you can tickle 80 wins this year, where they have 71 last year, so if they can get between 71 and 80, maybe by the 2025 season, you might have something. And season is starting, if you're not paying attention, 11 days from now. That got here quick, right? They open up March 28th against the Cincinnati Reds, and be very interested to see what happens. A little football, too. The Justin Fields deal over the weekend. Wow. Because this comes on the heels of what Adam Peters was able to do with Sam Howell. He's flipping him to Seattle. A bunch of draft picks exchanged, but the net is they wind up with like a low third or a high fourth round pick for a guy who wasn't going to be here. And my feeling on Howell, I may have said this on Friday, is I just don't think that, given that he started 17 games last year, that you can have him back up a rookie who's going to struggle. I think Marcus Mariota fits the bill a little bit better. He's been through more in the NFL, and if whoever it's going to be, if whoever they take at number 2, maybe it's Drake May, maybe we don't know, but whoever it is, he's going to struggle. It's inevitable that the rookie is going to struggle, and there are going to be players looking around the locker room thinking, well, gee, we got better performance last year out of Sam Howell. They might as well play him. Well, that's not what it's all about. It's all about developing it for the future. And so great job by Adam Peters getting value for a guy. Now, there's one thing that Howell has in value over Justin Fields is that he has 2 years left on a 5th-round pick rookie deal. So those are two numbers, I think, under $1 million. Next year is just under $1 million, maybe a little bit over for the final year, the 4th year of the deal. So that's a really cheap option for them. If it works out great, that he's really good behind Geno Smith and could step in and play, and the likelihood is he's going to start a game or two. It's 60 different quarterbacks started a game last year. But I think that was a big factor in his value, in that he's got 2 years under team control at a very low number. Justin Fields, on the other hand, he's got 1 year left, and they have, I think, another month and a half to make a decision on whether or not they want to pick up the 5th-year option, which is going to cost them like $25 million. So the Bears shipped him off to the Steelers. They only got what is likely to be a 6th-round pick. I guess if he manages to start a lot, it'll be a 4th-rounder. But you also have Russell Wilson there, and the hope is that they can resuscitate his career. He's coming in for a cheap number because most of the money's being paid by Denver. But at $1.2 million, if he doesn't work out, it's no loss there, and maybe Justin Fields gets an opportunity. Whatever it is, they've done a great job of upgrading their quarterback room, as they call it now, with Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, and Kenny Pickett all gone. Pickett, who and be careful about letting your feelings of unhappiness be known, because reportedly Pickett was unhappy that Wilson was coming in and he was going to have to compete with him for a job. So they went, oh yeah, well, watch this, and we're going to send you to Philadelphia, where Jalen Hurts has an enormous contract. And he's not going anywhere, so you're going to have to sit there. So he's gone. Mason Rudolph signed with the Tennessee Titans, and then Trubisky still looking for work after being released. And off of that, you get Russell Wilson, who's won a Super Bowl, and Justin Fields, who's starting to show some promise. If the Bears hadn't made that ridiculous deal that the Carolina made and allowed them to have the number 1 pick this year, where it seems like a no-brainer they take Caleb Williams, but who knows? We'll see. But that necessitated them dealing Fields. Now Ryan Poles, the GM, really blew it on this, because he had said that he was going to deal Fields before the Combine. They didn't do that. And then at the Combine, he said he was going to deal him before free agency. Well, he didn't do that. And when the dust had settled on a wild week of free agency on Saturday, he finally was able to get rid of him for a late-round pick, which, in retrospect, if he'd have handled it differently, he might have wound up with like a 2nd-rounder for him. Might have gotten something a lot higher than what they got. Bobby Wagner held his news conference in Ashburn on Friday, and of all the 16 guys that they brought in, I think he's the most intriguing, because he's still playing at a really high level. Now, he's going to turn 34 before the season starts. Turns 34 in June. But I looked at his numbers. He's played 12 years, 11 of them with Seattle. He took a year and he went to the Rams and then came back to Seattle, where he led the league in tackles and played every game. Didn't start one of them, but played every game. And I looked at his record since he came in the league 12 years ago. He's missed a total of 7 games. 7 games in his career over 12 years. He missed 2 games in 2013. He missed 5 games in 2014, but he was all-pro. Played in 11 games and was an all-pro that year. Then in 2015, he missed 1 game. In 2018, he missed 1 game, and that's it. That's 7 games over 12 years. He remains healthy, and last year, at the age of 32, going on 33, well, I guess he was 33 last season, he led the league in tackles. What's the secret?
I would say I just do a really good job of taking care of my body, constantly trying to, obviously working out, but taking care of it like yoga and, working with PTs and things of that nature. I think that's the biggest thing. But what keeps me motivated is just wanting to be great and wanting to do it for a long time. Watching guys like LeBron and people that's been able to do it at a high level for a long time, I think that's what keeps me going.
Why did he agree to come here? A lot of it had to do with Dan Quinn, who had been his defensive coordinator early in his career, and also a name from the recent past who remains a part of the organization as a broadcaster.
I've been a huge fan of London Fletcher, and actually somebody I was able to meet, last year in person, and he's been a huge help in my career. I reached out to him one time, and he offered some advice, and so just understanding that there's been great linebacker play here, and wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah. So the London Fletcher playing a role in this. Now here's the comp on Fletcher. He came here at the age of 32, and he'd been in the league a while. He'd won a Super Bowl championship in his rookie year in 2000 with the Rams, and he wound up playing the longest stretch of his career in Washington. He was here for 7 years. And in 2011, he made the Pro Bowl at the age of 36 and led the NFL in tackles. So Wagner at 34, if he can give him 3 years, that's huge, not just for what he does on the field, but his off-the-field leadership as well. I mean, he was known as a guy who everybody rallied around in Seattle, kind of like even like a coach on the field. And if he can play that role, they, even with Fletcher, and even though it was the Dan Snyder Redskins at the time, they did make the playoffs. They made the playoffs in his second to last year. So he probably had a role in that. And look, he used to make every tackle on the field. Team wasn't very good, but Fletcher was really good, and you hope that Bobby Wagner has something left in the tank. The other thing about him is he's very smart. And at this news conference, he was wearing a Howard sweatshirt. Why was he wearing a Howard sweatshirt? He's working on his MBA.
I actually started January. It's I think it's an 18-month course, and it was gonna be online, but I think that might have changed a little bit.
Why'd you choose Howard?
I think just trying to expand. Business is something that I've always wanted to do and always wanted to venture in. Something I do in my in off season, and just wanting, kind of similarly with football, you always want to try to find ways to perfect your craft, and so I felt like this was an opportunity for me to do that off the field. In the same breath, I've been able and fortunate to do a lot of work with the HBCU, and I just looked at Howard as one of a great school to learn business from, and it's one of the best in the country, and why wouldn't I, choose them?
That's cool. So Martin Mayhew, when he was playing here, he went to law school. There have been a number of players over the years who have used the opportunity to get advanced degrees there, and good for Bobby Wagner for getting his MBA from Howard. That's a really nice story. Also from the NFL, the backup quarterback for the Ravens the past couple of years, Tyler Huntley, is signing with the Cleveland Browns a 1-year deal. Now he's young. He's 26 years old. Went 3-7 in 10 starts. Started for Lamar Jackson, lost a playoff game in 2022 when he fumbled near the goal line, and Sam Hubbard returned it 98 yards for a touchdown. Remember that? He might have been able to lead them to victory. But the thing about this thing that stands out for me is that Joe Flacco came in and did a really good job. He didn't do a good job in the playoff game, but to get the Browns to the playoffs, and he's, about 10 years older? He's got to be 36. And he's going to go be a backup in Indianapolis. You would think that maybe he would be a better alternative for them, given the success that he brought them this last year. The problem I think they have is Lamar Jackson, not Lamar Jackson, but Deshaun Watson is going to be coming back off the shoulder injury. And do you want a guy in your locker room who the players rallied around? I mean, it's a weird It's a weird dance that's done. Like, you can't, I mean, even in the Justin Fields deal, if you're going to take Caleb Williams number 1, why wouldn't you just keep Fields around and wait for the right opportunity when somebody loses a quarterback to injury in the preseason or is panicked about who they have and want to get him? Instead, they got him out of the way because they were worried that Caleb Williams would get his nose out of joint having a quarterback there who's had some success. I think this would be this. I think this is the same situation in Cleveland. If I looked at that team and said, what's our best opportunity to win if Deshaun Watson gets hurt? It's probably Flacco, who stepped in and played so well last year. But they can't do that because he played well. I mean, it's a real weird catch-22. They don't want the players, when Deshaun Watson is struggling, to look over their shoulder and go, oh, there's Joe Flacco over there. He played really well with us. Now, the style that Huntley plays is more similar to what Watson plays than Flacco. But in terms of success with that team, with what Cleveland did last year with Flacco, that's really indicative of how things work in the NFL. Same thing with Robert Griffin III getting all upset Kirk Cousins was around. Like they did him a disservice by taking Cousins in the 4th round. As it turned out, no, they got to the playoffs with Kirk Cousins. They did get there with RG3, but by the time Cousins took him there, he had flamed out. Coming up, a Guinness Book of World Records record set this weekend by running and dribbling. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So I apologize for the scratchy voice. I've done this a couple of times now. Couldn't do it last year, but a friend of mine runs a tournament just for girls, hockey tournament. It's called the Ponytail, and they do it at the Laurel Ice House, I believe it's called. It's right off of 29, and it's a great hockey facility because they got multiple rinks in there, and they got teams from all over the country, girls teams. Looks like ages like 13 to 18, something like that, and it's really nice. So I do the PA for them, and in some of the rinks, the PA isn't very good, so I did a little more shouting than I should have, and that's why my voice is scratchy today, but hopefully I'll be 100% for tomorrow and ready to go the rest of the way. Yeah, I'm playing hurt. That's right. I'm playing hurt. So also over the weekend, and maybe Mike Callow will be talking about this on Bram's show today, Mike ran in the Rock and Roll Half Marathon, which they do every year in D.C. Mike has taken up running. He's gotten himself in really good shape, and all credit to him for getting that done, because it takes a lot of just discipline to do that. But a friend of mine went to Brandeis. I actually know him through my sister. My sister and brother-in-law were good friends with him at school at Brandeis and have remained friends. And he lives in New Jersey, but he's in this area a lot because his daughter played field hockey at George Washington. They lived here for a while, so they got a lot of friends. And anyway, their son, his name is Ezra, and he was a basketball player at Chicago, University of Chicago, so Division III, but now is a professional triathlete. That's not his full-time job, but he competes professionally in triathlon. So he's in unbelievable shape, and he's got this background with basketball. So rather than try and win the half marathon, and I don't know if he's the type of runner who could win that, but he decided that he was going to try and set a world record. And the world record would be the fastest time running a half marathon while dribbling a basketball. And that's a record that was set like 10 years ago, and it was 1 hour and 22 minutes. On Saturday, when he ran the race, Ezra ran it in 1 hour and 18 minutes. So he broke the world record, such as it is. I know it's not a world record that we debate a lot about on sports radio, but the record is fastest half marathon while dribbling a basketball. And he broke the world record, the verified world record by the Guinness Book, by 3 minutes, 1 hour and 18 minutes, which is a hell of a good time to run a race without dribbling a basketball. That's less than 6 minutes a mile. If you're doing less than 6 minutes a mile for a half marathon, you're in some kind of shape, and obviously he is. And obviously he has great coordination in that he was able to dribble a basketball the entire time that he did it. So I'll be interested to see when there is verification from the Guinness Book of World Records that Ezra Swell, I call him Swell. Ezra Swell holds the record now for the fastest half marathon dribbling a basketball, 1 hour and 18 minutes. Also, from the weekend, there was an obit that I wanted to talk about here for a second. He lived to be a fairly ripe old age, Gerald Levin, who passed away at the age of 84. But if you don't remember the name Gerald Levin, it brings up something that happened early this century, which told us a lot about the way technology was going. And Gerald Levin had become very, very successful in the industry with home box office, HBO. And in 1975, so at that point, cable TV is in its infancy. HBO is one of the few channels. But in a very smart move, Gerald Levin convinced the parent company, Time Incorporated, to take a chance with satellite broadcasts throughout the country. And so that's when you started seeing dishes pop up on the roofs all over the place and in bars and restaurants and things like that. And later, as a senior executive at Time, he played a key role in the 1990 merger with Warner Communications to create a powerhouse with film, television, and cable operations, as well as flagship publications including Time, People, and Sports Illustrated. This was a different world then in 1990. So there's no internet yet, and magazines are still a factor. And now he's taking something that's become very successful on cable TV, home box office, and merging it with Warner Communications. So you have film, television, and cable together. And he was named chief executive of Time Warner in 1992. But then he agreed in 2000 to become part of a takeover of AOL in an all-stock transaction worth about $184 billion. And this was seen as, okay, this is pulling the older world of cable TV into the newer world of AOL, and they're going to create this monster company. Both sides celebrated with new AOL Time Warner. Levin called the merger in January 10th, 2000, a symbol of the new millennium. The opportunities are limitless. AOL chief Steve Case draped one arm around Mr. Levin's shoulder and raised the other arm in a victory fist. Ted Leonsis was a part of this, too, as one of the founding fathers of AOL with Steve Case. And so this was seen as a stroke of brilliance in early 2000. Turned out to be a disaster. Before the deal closed in December, AOL coughed up $3.5 million in fines after the SEC accused the company of improperly inflating profits by hundreds of millions of dollars. And then it really got bad. Even before the final approval by the Federal Trade Commission, AOL's stock went down about 30%. The dot-com bubble, as the frenzy of investment imploded as capital dried up. There were signs, too, that culture clashes were brewing, the media colossal, the upstart swagger of AOL versus the old guard Time Warner. There was panic on both sides, said Ken Aliata, a journalist for the New Yorker magazine who long covered media affairs. Levin thought he would get the AOL digital know-how. Case thought he would get the Time Warner distribution know-how. None of this happened. Levin announced in December 2001 his plans to step down. He'd had some personal problems, including his son being killed. About a year after Levin left, AOL Time Warner posted a net loss of $98.7 billion. This is for 1 year, for 2002, a record for a U.S. company. AOL was dropped from the corporate name in 2003 after gradually shedding holdings such as AOL, and what remained of Time Warner was acquired by AT&T for $85.5 billion. And he later said that he presided over the worst deal of the century. Well, century's only 24 years old, but the point being is what they thought was going to work out in early 2000 turned out to be one of the all-time disasters. And it, I don't know if there's anything that's, maybe connected or something we can learn as Ted is jumped out and made this deal with Virginia, which looks like it's going to go down the tubes. But that is really something that was a disaster for him, for Steve Case, for Time Warner, and a personal disaster for Gerald Levin, who I guess spent the last 20-some years of his life regretting something that he thought could be as great as it was. Really unbelievable how much hope there was. Because I remember when this deal was announced, it's like, oh, wow. You know, this is like, you know, going to be a monster here. You got Time Warner merging with AOL. What's not to like about that? And how great this is going to be for Time Warner and AOL turned out to be a complete disaster for both of them. I got another basketball game I want to mention in just a moment here. But first, I wanted to get this in. I meant to do this on Friday. These things that pop up in pop culture that people want to glom onto and be in, I guess, you know, seen as being hip or being with it, and you never know where it's going to come from. And there's now this need or this want to get the $2.99 tote bag from Trader Joe's, and they can't keep them in the stores. Across the country, the bag, which retails for $2.99, is selling out quickly, prompting some stores to reportedly place limits on how many customers can buy. And video footage posted online appears to show enthusiastic crowds descending on stock displays like seagulls at the beach attacking a bag of spilled chips. On eBay, sets of the bags are listed for as much as $499, though it's not clear if anybody's actually paying that. A wide array of bags in various colors is available for under $20, including shipping. But I guess it's a real status symbol to be walking around with this canvas bag which says Trader Joe's on it. The kind of social signaling that people are doing, as they called it, and that's usually been reserved for luxury items. A canvas bag indicates, oh, wow, you must be really something if you shop at Trader Joe's, and you have, wow, the canvas bag. Who'd have thought? Man, that's really impressive. I meant to mention this, and I got a minute here to do this. I wanted to talk a little bit about what I saw in the ACC championship game. I mean, if you weren't really paying attention to all the conference tournaments over the weekend, NC State went in as a 10th seed and wound up winning the whole thing. They're one of 5 teams that was not projected to be in the tournament going into the weekend and earned their way in by winning the conference tournament. This was really remarkable. And, you know, for all the complaining that some of us older people do for the way the game is played these days, that it becomes essentially a 3-point shooting contest, and there's not the type of basketball that we grew up with, where the idea was to get the best percentage shot. If you watch this game, and I probably wouldn't have watched it, but I was babysitting for my granddaughter. I don't usually stay up that late. The game tipped at 8:30 and didn't end till close to 11 o'clock. But this was very, very entertaining stuff. And when you look at the 3-point numbers, now North Carolina, which lost the game, they lost the game by 8, 84-76, but didn't hurt them in terms of seeding. They're still a number 1 seed, and will play the winner of the Howard-Wagner game coming up on Thursday. But North Carolina, because they were having to come from behind, put up 30 3-pointers. They hit only 8 of them, which is 27%. That's Maryland territory there. And R.J. Davis and Cornet, I think it's Cornet is the way it's pronounced, or Cormet Ryan, they combined to shoot 5 for 18 from 3. Ryan has really shot them into some games this year, and R.J. Davis is a tremendous player for them. But North Carolina State, playing its 5th game in 5 days, had more left in the tank. And I saw something that I haven't seen at any level of basketball, you know, maybe since like the days of Bob Lanier. There's a player on North Carolina State. He's a senior. He flew under my radar. I'm sure that people who pay more attention to college basketball than I do know about DJ Burns. He's 6'9", 275 pounds. I mean, he looks like the guy at the pickup game at the gym who could stand to lose, 30 pounds, who probably had game back in the day but didn't keep himself in shape. He's obviously in shape. He played 28 minutes. But he's backing down Armando Bacot, who's in his 5th year of playing basketball at North Carolina. And Bacot went 34 minutes. He had very, very good numbers, 18 points and 12 rebounds. But as the game got into crunch time, the ball was delivered down low to DJ Burns, who was backing Bacot down time after time after time, and putting up only 12 shots, including a 3-pointer, which he made, but most of it was inside. 12 shots, he hit 9 of them,
had 20 points, 4 rebounds, and 7 assists. So when the defense was collapsing on him inside, he was kicking it out. And North Carolina State only shooting 14 three-pointers. He can live with that. If teams would shoot like that, unless you got Steph Curry on your team, it's okay. But they hit 43% of them. They hit 6 of the 14, just played a really efficient basketball game. Now you wonder, where was this all year? Why did they have to come in as a 10th seed? Why weren't they seeded higher? I mean, it doesn't really matter at this point. It's how you're playing at this time of year. And, maybe they have in their minds already won their championship. Maybe there's something to that. But this was just really good basketball. It was entertaining stuff. And if the game was played like this night after night after night, this would be great for the game. I mean, and the fact that NC State got there, they got there by the hair of their chinny chin chin as they beat Virginia, as Virginia really made a screw up at the end of the game and almost didn't make the tournament. But they got in and they gave us a hell of a game on Saturday night. And I'd also say this about the conference tournaments. Maybe you can look at Houston, which knew no matter what happened against Iowa State in their conference final, they were going to be a number 1 seed and barely showed up. Iowa State blew them off the floor. Maybe that's more common. But I give a lot of credit to what Hubert Davis did with his team with North Carolina, where they knew they were going to be a number 1 seed. They could have mailed it in on Saturday night, and they gave us great basketball. So as for all the complaining that I do and others do about this just being a 3-point contest and, not very skilled basketball, I think, overall, this was a game that had all the elements of what you used to see. You used to see that kind of a game where the inside game meant something, where guys, would post up and this guy Burns, he's got a couple of soft moves with the ball. He's got some really good ball fakes. I mean, it's really, really great stuff. And 2 guys have been around the game for a long time. He's a senior, and Baycott is a 5th-year senior. And they gave us some entertaining basketball. So I'll give them credit for that, and we'll see where they go. Maybe they're out of gas, and maybe that's it. But for one night, and for 5 nights, given what they had to do once they got into the tournament, they got it done, and that was exciting stuff. So for all this talk about expanding the tournament, if you look at that, if you look at the ACC tournament, the conference tournaments, that is the start of March Madness. And really, with the way the NFL has gobbled everything up, it used to be that they would turn over the rest of the sporting world in the middle of January. Now it's the middle of February. And when it goes to 18 games, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later, the Super Bowl's President's Day weekend. So by the time you come out of your football haze and look up, it's going to be late February, and there's going to be like 2 weeks left in the college basketball season. As it is now, it's like 3 or 4. And that's where things are heading. But thank you to North Carolina and North Carolina State for giving us entertaining basketball on Saturday. Anyway, we got the NCAA tournament off and running. We will have all the Virginia games as long as they last, and they get started tomorrow night in the second game against Colorado State. And Howard, good for Howard for making it. Kind of a barren year. The only other quasi-local team is JMU. And there is some reason to believe that they might pull the old 5-12 upset and beat Wisconsin. But kind of a barren year for locals in the NCAA tournament, and a year where Connecticut is expected to repeat. We'll have lots more to say about it throughout the week. Tony, I'm sure, will have plenty with his usual bracketology that he does every year, and that's coming up next. I'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m.